Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Planning Board meeting of January 23rd, 2024. We call the meeting to order at 7:05 p.m. If we would all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first order of business is the Housing Production Plan discussion with SERPAD.
Just a second to put the tech together here.
Just plug it right in. Lovely.
Toggle over so you've got the port there. We test drove this earlier.
Good evening, folks. If you could just take a moment to identify yourself for our minute taker.
Of course.
Thank you.
My name is Taylor Perez. I'm the Assistant Director of Housing and Community Development at SERPAD.
I'm Chris Welch, Senior Comprehensive Planner at SERPAD.
All right, thank you. Let me just kind of get myself situated. How are you folks tonight?
Well, thank you.
So, we will be presenting this story map about the Carver Housing Production Plan. The way it'll work tonight is I will run us through essentially how a housing production plan works, why we write one, why we update one, etc. And then I'm going to pass it over to Chris, who will walk us through the data, and then we'll kind of return and talk about findings from the data and next steps. Does that sound good?
Great.
Is everyone familiar with the housing production plan or no?
You can go over it.
Yeah, of course. So, a housing production plan is a 5-year plan. It exists because of Chapter 40B and is regulated through 760 CMR 56. You folks last wrote a housing production plan alongside your 2017 master plan. So we are updating that after 7 years or so. And we're just going to run through the basics of what is in a housing production plan. Again, it's a community's proactive strategy for planning and developing affordable housing. But we look at it a little holistically in both naturally occurring market rate housing and also subsidized affordables. So just think of it as your general housing plan. There are 3 components that we'll walk through, and we'll kind of go throughout the process of the next year or so as we continue to write this. The first is the housing needs assessment, which is what Chris is going to go over tonight, and it is essentially done. This lays the foundation and helps us understand what's going on in Carver, what does the housing stock look like, what does the housing market look like, etc. And once we've kind of all, gotten on the same page about that, throughout the next year or so, through both feedback from you folks, the data, and from community engagement, we will develop a set of affordable housing goals and complementary implementation strategies. Any questions on any of that? And so why we complete one, we just go over this super quick just so you folks know kind of the purpose of updating and having a 5-year housing production plan. If you folks aren't familiar, one is that you can get some more control over the local 40B process. So depending on how many subsidized housing units you permit in a given 12-month period, you can gain safe harbor for up to 1 to 2 years. And then also just general equity and housing affordability concerns and just supporting the Commonwealth's commitment to housing. So I think the big thing folks are most interested again is the fact that you can gain some control over the 40B process. So they do have some teeth as a plan. Any questions just about housing production plans generally before we go into the data? Okay.
Well, just if I could reiterate.
Yes.
You have some control over 40B if you have a plan approved by the Commonwealth and you have production.
Correct.
So there's 2 sides to the equation.
Correct. Thank you for that clarification. That's important. Just to kind of build off of that too, at the end of this plan, usually we'll work with you folks and the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities to ensure that we've met all of the requirements under 40B and the regulations for a housing production plan so that it can be approved, so that you can then use it to certify if you do produce a given number of units. Given all of that, I'm going to pass it to Chris. I'm going to pass this to you too so you can scroll. And we'll walk through the needs assessment.
And while we're doing this transfer of the laptops, This information is also on our website. We had it uploaded today. So you'll find it on the planning board website as well as the planning website with a link to this storyboard as well for the folks who might be watching at home.
I know, I dropped it. It's like, it's done, so.
Hi, everyone.
Mouse is not working.
Yeah. Apologies if I can't hear you on the right side of the room. I'm having a little bit of a hearing trouble, but
Chris,
promise I'm not ignoring you.
I don't want to interrupt, but could you pull the microphone a little
yeah, of
closer
course.
to you?
How's that?
Better, yeah.
Okay, awesome.
That-
You're all
that-
getting a little
yeah.
closer too.
And then state your name for the audience.
Yeah, of course. So Chris Welch, once again, Senior Comprehensive Planner with SERPED. So just rolling through our major data sources, the two main ones we utilized were the 5-year ACS, or American Community Survey, as well as the 10-year census. So those are the two big guys that we pulled data from. We also pulled data from the UMass Donahue Institute, as well as the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, and also the Warren Group for relevant real estate data. I'm not going to go too deeply into which data point we pulled from where, but I'm definitely happy to answer any questions on that right now if anyone has any. Okay, moving on. For those of you who don't know, it's probably important to establish the difference between naturally occurring or affordable housing and subsidized affordable housing. So naturally occurring affordable housing is available without subsidies and at lower price points when the right regulatory and market conditions exist for its development. So the lowercase a is meant to be distinguished from subsidized. Rather, it's like meant to kind of showcase this idea of not being cost burdened. So a household that's spending 30 or above its annual income would be considered cost burdened if they're spending 30% or more on basic living costs, which include mortgage payments, rent, and utilities. So it's important to make that difference clear between naturally occurring housing and then also when we talk about subsidized affordable housing. So like an example of being cost burdened, so looking at Carver as an example with its median household income of $62,000, a household that would be considered cost burdened would essentially, if they are spending more than $18,600 a year or $1,550 per month on these basic living expenses, so mortgage, rent, utilities, they would be considered cost burdened.
Excuse me. A tax included in that as well?
So like residential property taxes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, would be included in that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, that would be
you're saying
baked in.
mortgage, your
Yeah,
mortgage
The
and
whole-
taxes, the whole PMI.
yeah, like mortgage insurance, all those, yeah. If you guys would like to do this exercise for yourselves, we also have like how we broke down that calculation. It's pretty simple to go through if you guys check this out after the fact. As I was alluding to earlier, so it's important to distinguish then subsidized affordable housing or capital A affordable housing. So essentially, Carver is placed in a separate geography, a much larger one that includes other towns to determine the area median income, or AMI. So Carver is actually placed in a geographic region with the likes of like Boston and other large municipalities. So as a result, the AMI is much higher than Carver's median income, which is a good thing because that means more people in Carver will have access to subsidized affordable housing. So the numbers we kind of have there, the AMI for the region that Carver is under is nearly $150,000. So that means 80% of that is about $120,000 of annual income. So basically anyone making less than $120,000 of household income is qualified to apply for subsidized affordable housing. And we'll touch on as well like the importance of SHI, or subsidized housing inventory, which the state requires each municipality to have at least 10% of its stock to be subsidized affordable housing. So looking at this particular chart, we can see here, this is numbers for Carver. Looking on the left for renters, about 91% of renters are considered cost burden in Carver due to their income. And about 64% of homeowners are considered cost burden because of income. So we can see that through those charts there. Any questions so far?
Yeah. Exactly how many renters are there in Carver, though? Is this number skewed by 4 apartments in the whole town?
So we have that data too, so we'll talk about that shortly.
Thank you.
So now we're going to roll through some of the existing conditions, which that data will be included in. So first, we're going to look at population. So Carver hasn't grown too much since 2000. They did have a pretty significant population boom from 1990 to 2000 with a 16% increase, but from 2000 to 2020, the population has still been increasing, but not to the same extent. And there's a variety of factors that could be the reason for this, including smaller household sizes, less new housing being built, which we'll also touch on, as well as an aging population, which we're about to talk about now. So since 2000, the median age of Carver has increased by 5 years, so it's gone from 38 to 43. And we've also seen a pretty significant increase in the 60 and up residents in Carver, going from 18% to 38%. Another pretty significant number there is, although the proportion of those under 20 hasn't really changed, the population of under 20 has decreased over the last 20 years. So we can see that drop of slightly over 700 there. Now, speaking more about that population as a result, school enrollment has also decreased significantly since 2000, where we've seen about a 30% drop. And we've seen about less than a 200 student drop since the 2013-14 school year up until this one of the most recent school years. Kind of talking about more housing aspects. To answer your question, the proportion of those who own compared to rent is a bit different than what we see at the county level and the state level. So in Carver, about 11% of residents rent or households rent as opposed to own, which, as we can see here, is a bit less than the county and the state numbers there. Sorry. Going back to income, so looking at household income distribution, about 2/3 of Carver residents fall or have a median income of less than 100,000, and we can see that many people fall under the 50,000 to 74,999 range for household income. Just to showcase the extent of the decrease in median income in Carver, we can see here from 2000 to 2010 there was an increase of nearly $20,000 annually in median household income, but that has dropped a bit since then with our most recent numbers in 2021. And this is also a result of several different factors, but probably none more prominent than industry changes in town and workforce leaving town as well. So that was definitely something of note that we don't really see with other towns that are like Carver's neighbors, as well as the county and the state, as you can see from the numbers here, where the county and state have steadily increased over the last 21 years. Talking about cost burden again, we can see here that about 32% of homeowners are considered cost burden, while about 71% of renters are considered cost burden. So we can see like those are pretty significant numbers, and those are significant mainly because as a result of current real estate markets, the housing costs for Carver continue to rise. 32%, sorry.
Just to go back to your question, if you can scroll back up to that just for reference. So you can see about 880 renter households in Carver are cost burdened.
Well, I don't know where you could find 880 rental units in Carver.
Well, there's,
Maybe I'm confused.
it would number up to about 11 or 1,200 total renters in Carver, correct?
Just about.
Well, because somebody can be renting a house. Is that kind of data included?
We can determine, so you're saying like someone who is,
Somebody could be owning a house and living in it. Or
Right.
could own the house but rent it.
right.
So you have that.
Did we
that
go
as
through
part
owner
of your
occupancy
survey?
already?
And that would, at around 11 or 1,200, that would work out to about the 10% of the population that was previously mentioned.
If you know where they are, that's fine.
I honestly, I wouldn't have thought it was that high. But
We're happy to double check just to take a
Okay,
look
no,
at.
no.
No, for sure. I get it because it's like when you see the numbers, you're like, wow, like that's a substantial amount of folks. So, I mean, it's probably like you were saying that folks are either renting. I know that there's also a substantial portion of like mobile homes and stuff in town. Those could be
That was
being
my next
rented.
question.
Yeah.
Do you consider mobile homes rented? Because our friend here owns 1/520th of a percent of his. So
Right.
is that
No, of the
considered
park.
rented?
I own my own house, but I own of the
Okay,
park.
of the park.
At least in terms of the census, I don't think
There are no
so.
rental units in my park.
Right. Usually they're owner occupied. But you know what we can do, just to be sure, we'll take a closer look at it, just to, have it
It's
more.
just off the cuff, it doesn't seem
It
like.
doesn't seem right, that's
Okay.
why.
Yeah, we'll be thorough on that. Definitely.
Yeah, we'll definitely take a look at it, for sure.
Yep, so continuing on, as I kind of stated before, the sales prices for homes in Carver continue to rise along with other local examples, as well as the county, state, and nationally. We can see here that Carver is on the lower side compared to its neighbors as well as the state and county. However, as we're about to go into, that number is still far higher than possible for many residents in Carver to afford a single-family home or condo. Before we get to that, though, just quickly touching on housing type, as we kind of said, mobile homes do make up a pretty significant proportion of housing types in town.
Now, are those even counted in the sales? You don't, that's a private sale of private property.
We can dive into that as well. It doesn't distinguish it necessarily off the cuff when we were looking at the ACS
Because
and
it's considered a private sale between me and the next owner. It's not.
You're referring to the previous, the median home sale prices in reference to
But
this?
they'd even be counted in there.
I'd have to look at the Warren Group and how they classify things, because usually the way they break it down is single-family, condos, and then all residential property types, which I imagine mobile homes might fall into. But it is complicated, right? Because sometimes mobile homes are co-ops and whatnot, so there's a little more nuance there that we can explore, for sure.
And where we have so many.
His
Right.
question is important because we have South Meadow Village. There's, how many are in there?
520 units.
500. There's Pine Tree Village.
Right.
roughly a third
There's,
of the,
Cranberry
Carvers.
Village.
Right.
There's Waterview Village.
Yeah,
So
we-
those are 4 that I know off the top of my head.
We did some site visits, I think, back,
I think we said
early-
Cranberry Village, right?
yeah.
It's got to be close to 1,000.
We visited quite, I think, at least one or two.
Altogether, probably, yeah.
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 closer to 1,500.
You think so?
It's about a third of the housing in Carver is mobile home units or manufactured units.
Okay.
Yeah, let's look into that more, especially if there's so many and it's like of concern. We're happy to explore that further.
That was definitely a data point that we noticed in the initial sweep. So yeah, that's definitely something we could look into further. Any other questions so far, by the way? I know
Well,
I'm throwing a lot of data at you guys right now.
In regards to that, what would it take to make a lot of these manufactured homes eligible?
State law.
Yeah, for the SHI, you're saying? This is a complicated question that I don't think we have an answer for. As far as I understand, don't quote me, but again, this is my understanding, the reason subsidized housing inventory does not count manufactured homes, one, it would be the presence of a deed restriction, and then two, I think it has something to do with the strange definition about them not being like permanent property or something like that. Like they're not considered fixed units.
But they're on a foundation. There's no
No.
wheels any longer.
Oh, yeah, there's
Yeah.
still wheels.
There's
They're
still
still there.
wheels?
Yeah.
Okay,
It's only newer ones that have to have a
Underground.
slab and be anchored
Yeah.
on the slab.
okay, all right.
But there's been
I got tires on mine.
that's
About
awesome.
all of them have tires.
Oh, I thought they took them
I've
off
been on
the...
many.
I think newer ones, you're right, definitely don't. But I think that's an issue that not just you folks, but a lot of folks will come and ask us when we start doing housing production plans. It's like mobile homes are one of the most common naturally occurring affordable housing options, right? But there's just so much nuance and kind of legal barriers as to why they don't usually end up on the subsidized housing inventory.
Trailer hitch too, if you want to.
So,
If you can.
my question then would be, I own a lot of land.
Mm-hmm.
I bring in a manufactured home and put it on that lot. How is that going to differ from putting it on in a community of manufactured homes?
Right. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that.
I don't think Carver would allow you to put a mobile,
A manufactured home, they would, yeah. There's no restriction on manufactured homes. On RVs, there's restrictions, yes.
There's probably, I actually would be curious because we get this question so much, we should actually look at like the regulations. I don't think it would be in 40B itself. I think it'd be in the Code of Massachusetts regulations. We can see if there's any sort of definitions or any sort of information about, again, what,
we're just that horse of a different color, you know?
yeah, right. We'll look into it though. Again, I don't think that I'll have a good answer for it, but I could at least give you the reason as to
Yeah.
why.
Thank you.
Of course.
I'd be happy to lend a little insight as I understand it. So I'm a member of the American Planning Association Massachusetts chapter, and we have been advocating in earnest for the last 20 years at reforming Massachusetts zoning laws, 40A in particular. We found out early years is that there's some opportunity if you can get some agreement with real estate folks and the Home Builders Association to make some tweaks to 40A. 40B is where the affordable housing side is at, and we learned early on that is the third rail of real estate politics. There are so many people who are contributing to their local legislator and his needs and their needs in fundraising and things like that. There simply is no appetite in the great and general court to change the law, because the folks who have the law set up to their advantage love it that way, and they don't want to change it. So there's potential for some tweaks in 40A. 40B is just brutal to try to change. In fact, we've determined it's not worth the resources, however many resources we might try to marshal, to move that needle.
What about modular homes that are on cement slabs? Are
Yeah,
those taxed differently?
as far as a modular home, and there was a great story in the Globe a couple weeks ago about creating homes in a factory and coming and assembling like Legos, whether they're building high-rises in Boston or someplace else. Those are different from a mobile home.
Are they
Because-
considered more of a home or a mobile home?
Well, it gets back to the point, they're more of a home to use those sort of terms. But in the calculation of your subsidized housing inventory, that's where towns have asked for years. Kingston has 2 significant mobile home parks, and just can't get any traction with the majority of your legislators to get that done.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay. Just one last point too. A majority of Carver's housing type is 1 unit detached at 75% there. Moving on, speaking a bit more detailed about Carver's housing stock, we can see here that nearly 2/3 of Carver's housing stock was built or developed from 1970 to 1999. We were kind of touching on previously why the population might not be increasing as much as in the 1990s, and housing stock is definitely a big piece of that. Is that prior to 2000, there was a significant amount of Carver stock that was developed and built. As you can see here, from 2000 to 2019, only 8.4% has been built. And these numbers are only reflected up until 2019, since we're currently not finished with the 2020s quite yet, but hopefully.
So is that to say that it was overbuilt from 70 to 99?
It'd be probably more to the point that the 2007 crash caused, I mean, Carver was overrun with repossessed homes and...
Available land for building houses.
Yeah, well, we don't have a lot. I mean,
That's what I'm saying. So that's why I'm asking from 70 to 99, if we
If we're running out of
resources and built what we built.
Yeah, contextually, that's important to note too, that like Carver is full of cranberry bogs, right, and unbuildable land.
Buildable land, right.
So it's very possible that that's also a big piece of why a lot of this development didn't necessarily happen in the 2000s. But that's definitely something that we are going to like note in the future HPP to make sure to cover, because like contextually, that's very important for Carver, right? So yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering if that's going to impact us if we don't have
Right, we should-
land and we don't have those resources in which we can build upon.
We
Right.
should have an idea of what amount of buildable land is available in Carver.
Are there any other similar towns to Carver elsewhere in Massachusetts?
In terms of,
Unbuildable land?
I mean, a lot of the so, we serve 27 cities and towns, and quite a few of our rural communities in particular have a similar challenge, and that's actually something we'll get into later in the presentation. But yeah, I mean, so we haven't, for example, like Rochester would probably be fairly similar. Middleborough has a very dense downtown, but they do have, quite a few other natural resources and large protected open spaces. So kind of similar again, but, maybe a little bit different again due to that kind of presence of their downtown. But there are, at least in our region, quite a few that we could use as touchstones if that would be helpful, for sure. I'll put that down.
Any other questions before?
I just think it was important to ask that because it almost seems like we're at a disadvantage in the fact that we have unbuildable properties based on the fact that they're cranberry bogs.
For sure.
Right.
It could be an advantage too, because look at places, excuse me, that are overbuilt,
Right.
So I think that is a positive way to look at it.
Yeah, I agree. At least in terms of SHI and whatnot, I know it's a percentage of what your existing year-round housing would be. So at least it's somewhat scaled, as they would say. But I understand where you're coming from in the sense that it's difficult when so much of your land is, again, unbuildable, wet, et cetera, and you want to balance that. Our goal, at least because we work with so many rural communities, is always to ensure that we strike a balance. And again, that's why I think we're here with you folks to talk about that. So as we kind of continue this housing production plan process and we do our community engagement, we can definitely emphasize this idea of balanced growth and figuring out, again, what can we work with where it matters, what should we avoid, how can we protect our existing natural resources, et cetera. And make it so that, again, you folks can feel like you have control over the process and that we're seeing good outcomes that make sense.
And we're interfacing a lot with town staff already with, I'm specifically thinking of our PDA and PPA projects, so that's priority development areas and priority protection areas. And we've met with town staff on that to establish like areas of town that you don't want to see specific development on or protection of particular land. So luckily, to the benefit of the HPP, because we're interfacing with that project already, there's a lot of overlap with that type of work as well. So yeah, any other questions?
If I may. And one of the issues about the amount of housing was reflected in a slide a couple slides ago that basically said 75% of Carver are single-family residents. And that's the secret sauce in creating more housing, is moving to a new housing type that's not exclusively or almost exclusively single-family housing. You look at the density of a mobile home park versus the density of a subdivision, there's a lot more units in the area. And so to solve the housing problem, we have to look at new solutions and not just trotting out the old things, because there's only so much land, and the cost for a single-family house is considerably more than some of the other options for people.
Now, isn't the state pushing for accessory, well, AUBs,
ADUs, accessory dwelling units, in-law suites.
so that any single-family house basically can add on a unit?
Yeah, it's a great idea.
So we have 75% of them can add on a unit.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and there's been a lot of talk about ADUs, not just in Mass, but just nationally, as a great way for single-family homeowners to be able to, again, add a unit that's appropriate for, aging family members, an in-law apartment, right?
Starting out families.
That's a big thing, too, is a lot of
Give the kids their own.
college-age
instead of a bedroom
folks,
in the
young
basement.
families, et cetera. That's something we'll definitely explore here if you folks are interested, for sure.
Push
Well-
them out of the nest, even though they're still attached to the tree.
We're in the same tree, just not the same branch, right?
You may not be interested or not, may be forced upon you, right, by the state.
I think it has traction, but I mean, I'm not sure if there's any immediate thing in the pipeline that I am aware of. Don't quote me on that. But that's just, it is being discussed, is my understanding for sure. I think there's interest in it, again, not just at the state legislature, but nationally.
Part of the state of the state and the state of the city addresses is very much mentioned.
Right.
And a lot of almost your generation seems to be moving back in with parents, as I am.
Congratulations.
Experiencing it.
Yeah, I turned 27 this year, so a lot of my family members and close friends are in this kind of similar situations where I was fortunate enough to be able to buy my first house in 2021, but that is an outlier, and I bought at a very, very good time. And not a lot of folks have that opportunity, not just for home ownership, but even just affordable rents. We're in a squeeze for sure in terms of the housing market. A lot of folks my age and a lot of folks looking to downsize are having a really hard time finding housing that's affordable, so.
So touching on SHI, as we kind of said, so Carver's current percentage as of the most recent 2020 10-year census numbers shows a 3% SHI figure. As we said before, the requirement by the state is 10% under 40B. So in order to reach this 10% threshold, Carver would need to produce another 323 SHI eligible units to hit that 10%. So what does all this data mean? Question mark. So our two major takeaways from our initial needs assessment sweep is that Carver's population is aging, which is very on par with Carver's neighbors, as well as the county, state, nationally. So it definitely fits in with what we've been seeing in other communities, especially in the region. And our other big takeaway is that there's a mismatch between residents' income and the cost of housing in town as well, as we've mentioned a few times. Just to do a quick exercise, looking at what the median sale price was for a single-family home in 2022, which was $495,000 in Carver. We've kind of broken down what would go into a mortgage payment just based off current interest rates, what it would take to have 20% down on a house with that median sale price, along with, I think we actually pulled the property taxes for Carver as well for that particular year, as well as what it would cost for home insurance as well. So from that extrapolation, we can see that a monthly payment would come out to about $3,400 a month, and that's with a 20% down payment.
That's $99,000.
Yeah.
Not just 20%, but almost $100K down payment
Yeah.
to get to a $3,400 rate. Sorry.
No, you're good. So from that number, we could see that for this housing to be considered lowercase affordable, a household would need to be making $136,000 a year. So in these current market conditions, about 2/3 of Carver aren't able to afford a single-family home in 2022. So that was, like I said, a huge takeaway for us going through our data sweep. And it's definitely something that we'll further look into and refine, as we've said in the further HPP draft. And now I'm going to pass it over to Taylor, who's, swap computers, who's going to talk about the barriers for housing development in Carver.
Musical.
Thank you.
I did just want to clarify, while I could not rest not knowing about that housing cost burden data and what was correct, and thank you for pointing that out, it was 75% of renter households are cost burdened or extremely cost burdened, and 37%, so that's 1,545 owner households are cost burdened or severely cost burdened. So thank you for pointing that out. We will make sure that gets fixed. All this to say, I think we've kind of already been getting into this. What's limiting development opportunities in Carver? We have to do this section. This is a required section in the Housing Production Plan. This, again, is, I think, just getting at the conversation we've already been having as to what could make it difficult to produce new housing that's lowercase and uppercase affordable, and how should we balance that and consider this as we move forward. And so I don't think we need to kind of beat a dead horse. High-cost environments are definitely one of the biggest concerns and issues, barriers, not just here but everywhere. It's expensive, like we've said. The housing market is insane in Massachusetts, nationally, and that can make it really difficult for, like we've said, young families, downsizing adults, et cetera, to find affordable housing options. As we've also said, tons of environmental considerations. You folks have plenty of priority habitats, vernal pools, critical natural landscapes. You folks are in a very wet area. You have a ton of cranberry bogs and marshes, things that we need to consider and find land and, again, make good, well-informed choices about, where would we want to potentially explore a zoning change? Where would that make sense? Where could new housing be supported by adequate space infrastructure and be away from key natural resources? These are all things we want to consider so that, again, when we're talking about siting for new housing, we're thinking about it really appropriately and contextually. And so, as we kind of alluded to earlier, something that we can explore is changes to zoning regulations. You folks have a single residential agriculture district, which allows for single family by right at over an acre. Duplexes and two-family developments are allowed via a special permit in other districts, including general business, village district, et cetera. But we might want to consider, again, where can we put other types of housing? How can we diversify the housing stock, whether that be through, for example, cottage cluster housing development, open space residential subdivision design, if you folks don't already have something like that. And where could we look at even like compact multifamily? You folks are subject to Section 3A. That might be something you want to consider, et cetera. So just exploring the zoning and, again, thinking about where are changes appropriate in town, how can we do this thoughtfully, et cetera.
One of our challenges is the lack of infrastructure.
Right.
Currently, we don't have a water system, a
Ta-da.
septic system.
Right.
And we're trying to, we just redid the transfer of development rights, and it's more focused on allowing multifamily in the village districts and trying to centralize our town because, again, the services, the police, the fire.
Right.
We're trying to keep everything centrally located and available. Our last master plan, our last two master plans, both done through Serpide, called for increasing the residential lot size to 2 acres and 200-foot frontage. That's part of our master plan that was supported, and it's outlined through Serpide. I had a brief discussion, very small one, with Mr. Bott earlier in regards to, we do have a conservation subdivision or open space subdivision, about increasing the density in that area.
Yep.
But again, the master plan also calls for not allowing increased density on anything in our town, not allowing, but I don't see any other way other than to try and focus towards conservation and open space subdivisions.
Right.
And allowing a higher density there to kind of help protect the rest of the town from the
Right.
sprawl and growth. Because I'm looking at your two maps here, and just the amount of water and the fact that the aquifer under Carver not only serves us, but
Right.
serves a vast amount of the South Shore community in regards to that. And we've already seen what's going on Cape Cod in regards to their septic system, because
Right.
we all know the water
Right.
flows downhill. And we've been trying to protect our resources in regards to that with the increase in the PFAS issues and what we're going to have to deal with over the next 10 years and
Right.
trying to clean that up. It causes a lot of concern in regards to overdevelopment, growth, and potentially environmental impacts on the not only the surface but the underground water
Right.
systems. 90+% of this town is on wells, and close to 100% on septic systems. So those are issues that we have to take into consideration in regards to this. We want to see it develop. We've had several 40Bs come through here in the past couple of years. For better or for worse, eventually we're going to get one because the state is kind of forcing us into this. Plus, we also have to add 750 new units on, excuse me, correct me if I'm wrong, please, 15 acres of land?
We can-
50 acres.
We can talk about that. You folks are an adjacent small town, so your requirement's actually much smaller than 750.
235.
It's 235 on 15 acres?
I'm going to talk about that.
Sure.
Yeah, because we have,
And how
Good-
can
we have
we
good news.
work this, and how can we work these requirements into our housing production plan, knowing that we're preparing for it?
right.
How do we focus development to these areas that we're already required to do?
Right. Well, I have some good news that we were going to say at the end of the presentation, but I think it's a good time now to get into it. Serpide applied for and successfully received a one-stop grant through the community planning grant at the state for $165,000 to help our 7 classified rural communities, including Carver, comply with Section 3A. So we have a pool of money, and we've been prepared to help you folks comply with Section 3A, and we have additional funding set aside through district local technical assistance to complete the housing production plan this year. So we are at your disposal, essentially, for the next 2 years or so to help you folks figure out how you'd like to comply with 3A and also produce this housing production plan. So we are happy to tackle them both at the same time. I think it makes sense, and I'm glad that this came up, to, again, write the housing production plan and concurrently explore Section 3A compliance, what that could look like. We're happy to come back and explain in more detail what those requirements look like for Carver, because you don't have a 50-acre requirement. You can do it in whatever size works to get your unit capacity count. The only thing that will matter is that you can prove to the state that you will have a zoning district in place that will have the required unit capacity at a gross density of 15 units per acre. But if that can happen in 10 acres, that's okay. It's a lot.
Right, well, 15 units, that
Right.
kind of density is just unsustainable in this town because of the our water supply,
Right.
and all of that. So again, we look forward to working with you on this very much.
Yeah, we've been working with Freetown adjacently for a district around their commuter rail station, and similar things have come up. We have worked or plan to work with other rural communities, and I definitely think that this is something that is a challenge, and we're trying to figure out again how to best navigate it and end up with something that looks great with you folks. But again, ultimately, it is up to the municipality if they want to comply with Section 3A. I can't speak for the state and what the Attorney General's office and how they will handle it going forward. I can only speak for the fact that we are here to help you folks if that's what you want.
We do, yes, for sure. 'Cause
Right.
there's only two ways really into Carver. One's from 495 and one's from Route 44, and
Right.
it kind of puts us in a pinch point too.
Right.
Where do we put the housing? Do we put it at these already overburdened areas? We're looking at North Carver's development. We're looking to add up to 8,000 cars a day in that area already.
Right.
So how are we going to adjust, and how is our infrastructure, just the roadway systems, which are already overburdened, how are they going to deal with it? So
Right.
those are some of the issues that we have to deal with.
Yeah. At the end of this presentation, I'm happy to pull up a similar presentation, well, not similar, but related to 3A that we did in the town of Norton, where we did citing your district exercise, and we essentially run a GIS suitability analysis that can take in all of this information on where there's open space, where there's highway interchanges, where there's sewer or not, where there's water or not, et cetera. And it produces a nice final map that helps us say, hey, here's 3 areas in town that have a ton of great amenities and good infrastructure, and here's all these areas in town that we definitely want to avoid. And hopefully that can help us at least guide the siting of this district so that we can look and say, okay, we have a fairly informed, data-driven decision-making process. We know that this area in town, again, has access to water, has a highway interchange nearby that we either, if we want to be near it, we can do that. Again, it's very customizable, and we're happy to help you folks kind of do that to see, again, where will it make sense in town. But that alluded to my 2 final barriers was public utilities and also just staff capacity and time. In rural communities, there's usually 1 or 2 staff members on who have a ton of different responsibilities, and it can be really difficult to, again, split your time across a bunch of different things that need to get done to accomplish the goals that we will set out in this plan. Like you alluded to, we did look at the previous planning goals in the 2017 master plan and the 2017 housing production plan. We don't have to run through these in close detail, but we will kind of use these to guide some of the work here. I do agree with you, your point about densifying, for lack of better words, increasing the density in the conservation subdivision. We actually have an environmental staff member, Danica Belknap, who just did a regional OSRD bylaw review, and a lot of the suggestions that came out of that was, reduce the lot size for housing and increase the conservation amount, reduce the frontage requirements, et cetera. So we can work with her again to put together some suggestions that can go in this. I think that's it in terms of everything up to this point. Like I said, I think next steps here is you folks can, again, if there's anything here you have questions about further, please let us know now or via email, et cetera. We are available to answer those questions, pull additional data that you folks feel is relevant. I've already taken some notes from our discussion today. And then we would like to begin some community engagement. I think, Tom, you might have seen a survey, but we can provide it to you folks as well. Typically, the way we launch our community engagement in a more involved housing production plan like this is via a housing survey where we ask folks preferences, concerns, et cetera, and it just helps us orient ourselves with the town. It helps residents get to know, again, the planning process and what we're doing. And then we can start talking about other events, whether you want us to go, if you have a harvest festival or something you want us to go out to, if there's summer events that you think it would be important for us to pop up at and engage with residents and talk about housing concerns, et cetera, we can be pretty flexible in terms of what that looks like. And we'll likely have our colleague Maria Jones, who's our public engagement and communications planner, come in, and we can make some plans at that point. And then once we've done all of this engagement, hopefully which occurs throughout the spring and the summer when it's nice and warm and everyone's in a good mood, we'll go into the development of the affordable housing goals and strategies that we alluded to and begin writing the plan for a fall, winter time, end of the year delivery. Does that all sound good?
It sounds great. Are we going to kind of work in a 40B development plan in regards to the housing plan? Like work on an overlay district and,
For 3A?
well, as part of our housing production plan, you have it listed here, locate 40B comprehensive permit developments in appropriate
see.
locations.
Right.
And create design standards as well as rules and regulations.
Right. This is from the 2017 master plan. This was before my SERP time, so forgive me, I don't think I can speak fully to this. I imagine the citing of the 40B might have had to do with the fact that at the time, if you folks could have gotten your housing production plan certified, you may have been eligible to have a little bit more negotiation in the 40B process. At least in terms of design standards and rules and regs, we are happy to explore that with you folks here, if that's helpful.
We modified the Carver TDR to
Right.
increase land conservation and encourage growth. Again, we talked about the conservation subdivision
Right.
design bylaw, which
Right.
it's something that I've been looking to work towards, and
Okay.
got brought to our attention again this year.
Yeah. We've had, again, we just kind of are wrapping up the housing production plan process in Middleborough, for example, and we've been exploring, just in the plan, some ways to modify the OSRD. And again, I will get in touch with Danica to talk about what that could look like here. Sometimes that looks like even making your preferred subdivision design where that's by right or like only exists with like site plan review rather than via a special permit. So if that's a mechanism you folks are interested in, we can explore that. Any other immediate thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, feelings?
No, thank you very much.
Of course. Just in the sake of time, I don't want to keep the folks who are waiting behind us on the agenda to sit here longer. We will send Tom the Norton story map about the suitability analysis as it relates to Section 3A. What's great is that you folks have until the end of next year, so there's a lot of time, at least a lot of time, in air quotes, that we can really think about this. And again, I think we can drive a lot of that engagement that will be necessary for 3A through this housing production plan process. So,
Honestly, we only have about a year
right.
because our next town meeting will be in April, and we're going to have everything
Right.
kind of squared away by this time next year.
Right, we're doing a
order
similar
to-
process right now in some of our other communities, and it comes up fast.
Yeah.
So,
To that schedule, if I could. So when we submitted our action plan that was submitted with the immense help of the folks at Serpent, we looked at the schedule, and at that time we were in the 50-acre madness of the
Right.
initial MBTA bylaw, which just didn't work.
I will
in a
find
lot
it
of
for you right
places.
now.
So that's since have been tooled back to Carver for 235 units to be created. So in that action plan that we put together, exploration of options for new compliant multifamily zoning through 40R or other, we're in that period right now. So that's
Right.
January 1st through June 30th, 2024. The presentation of district options, to look at some of these district options and present them to the planning boards and select boards, is between July 1 and September 2024, so over the summer. We'll bring some of those options to the planning board and the select board. November 1 through 12/31/24 are to review those districts with planning board and select board and any necessary public outreach. And the adoption of those new districts at a spring or fall town meeting in 2025.
I love when we're on schedule. That's nice. I love being on schedule.
Yeah.
That's great to hear.
So we are, we've got essentially our town meeting next year.
Yeah,
in order to
April
bring
2025
The 3A
or so.
zoning bylaw to date.
Okay.
Now, how is this going to be done, and who from our community is going to be involved in it?
So I think that's up to you folks. The way we have done it historically is we work very closely we'll work with Tom and we'll work with you folks. I think probably the closest in the early drafting of a bylaw and kind of decision-making process. And then I think when we get to community engagement and how we kind of want to go from there, we're pretty flexible. And also, you know, if you folks feel it's important to have, for example, like an information session before we even start discussing a bylaw, because you folks don't have a location requirement, there's a lot more room to think about where's this going to go. That's a good room or a good time to have some public engagement. So maybe what we can do, thinking out loud here, and Tom, we can coordinate further, is as we get probably through our spring 2024 town meeting season, because we have a couple things going on elsewhere, we can come back to you folks probably in April, May, start talking about some district siting options and how we want to plan our public engagement for 3A and make a much more like definitive plan at that time. Would that work? Or are you concerned about timing? Would you want to start sooner? We're flexible.
No, I was more concerned about who from the community the town of Carver is going to be involved in this process.
The actual like siting decision
Typically,
making.
we form a committee and we
If you
work
folks would like
everything.
to, I think we're pretty deferential to what you folks think is going to be the best route. If you think it's through a working group or a committee to make the decisions, that is totally fine with us. We're happy to meet with a committee, help facilitate discussion, et cetera. If you think it's through bigger public engagement efforts, we're happy to do that. If you think it's through an online engagement campaign, we're happy to do that. Very, very kind of up to you folks, and happy to sit down and have another discussion again about this to figure out, like, is it a committee? Is it this? Is it that?
Nope, I'll sit down and talk with Mr. Botto.
There you go.
If I may. So in some of the conversations we recently had with the planning board and the select board on a 61A property, and the potential for acquiring the 61A property and trying to put affordable units on that. In most of those presentations, most of those discussions I had, I talked about reinstalling the local housing trust. It's something that we've had in the past. It's something that's already set up. It's just been dormant. So the local housing trust, made up of those people who are cited in that, is a great core group to look at those, because those are people who are focused specifically on housing. So one of those things I would like to do is get that group reinvigorated, re-energized, and actually give them CPC money to spend if necessary. But as far as a core group of folks who are going to be in the trenches with something like this, why reinvent the wheel? Just use the things that we have in place already. So the local housing trust is likely a good source for things like that.
I thought you said that was defunct. No?
It's on the books. It hasn't met since 2015.
Right.
It's a matter of having the select board and having this conversation with the select board, as I've had from other places. Was that you got unplugging? Okay.
Yeah, we're good
Like I
anyways.
say.
That's the end of it, so.
Right, because we used the zoning bylaw study committee to go over the TDRs and do that last time, and that was under the planning board, 2 members of the planning board, select board, various members of the public, things along those lines.
So I think it's good to have a core group that's sort of focused on that. And obviously memberships from Planning Board, Zoning Board of Appeals, things like that are outlined in the local housing trust. But it's good to have a core group like that. So I just switched over to my computer, and so we talk about those places that are appropriate for more dense housing. For things like on the 3A design district, you know, we've already sort of talked about it in our master plan. We've talked about it in the housing production plan. Those village areas. We just saw it right here. Amend existing village district bylaws to be more friendly and encourage mixed-use development in Carver Center. That area of Carver Center from South Meadow Road up just north of the elementary school is the area that the town has already looked at and said, yeah, this is a spot for things like that. When you look at the necessity for infrastructure to support higher density development, you need to have it in a compact area. So something like where we're at right now is the spot we've already talked about where these things should be. We look at the resources that are in the neighborhood. We got a fire station next door that's should be torn down. We've got a shopping center with nobody in it except a church that works there, a couple times a week. We've got a EMC center, up the street. We've got already developed pieces of land that we could incorporate into those things like that. And when you look at the advantages of density, you have the opportunity to create a package treatment plant for septic uses. You've got the ability to create a public water supply. In fact, if you have them, close enough together, you could get into one of my favorite things on the planet, which is geothermal heating and cooling. You could create a geothermal heating and cooling district that's giant upfront cost, but amazing cost over the lifespan of a project that reduce the cost for people who are living in these places, both market rate and affordable rate, to do those sort of things. So we look at how do we comply with the MBTA bylaw. These are some of the things we're talking about. Where is the where? Well, we've already talked about where the where is in previous plans, and this hasn't moved much. So, those are some of the options, some of the items that we've got to look at, and some of those options that we should consider. Let's not put it out in the middle of the woods. Let's put it where we already decided it was a great idea, by putting it in the center, where people can benefit from a walkable community, where they can walk down the street to a store, to a restaurant.
That's why we pushed higher density to the center of town.
Right.
And towards the highway access points.
Yeah, so one of the solutions is, either under our nose or under our butt, depending whether you're standing up or sitting down. So, we're in the area where, we should be making things happen, because that's what we've talked about for years. It's just the problem is talk isn't cheap, because we talked about $165,000 grant is not cheap, but you've got to try to implement those things, and those things come from giving opportunities and making it attractive for people by having a significant density to build in, and that's part of the MBTA bylaw, and it's not an option. When we first talked about the MBTA bylaw, I said, well, they're gonna impose, they're not gonna give you some money for grants and things like that. So if the town doesn't want to comply with something like that, so be it. But the Attorney General has recently issued an advisory that compliance with the MBTA community zoning bylaw is not only mandatory, it's an essential tool for the Commonwealth to address the housing crisis among with our climate and transportation goals. They go on to say in that advisory that because some local zoning sought to limit and prevent construction of multifamily housing near MBTA stations, the statute explicitly responds by requiring MBTA communities, and that is a very broad definition of an MBTA community. We are NBA adjacent small community. Now they broke that up quite a bit more, which makes this only 235 units.
Right.
But we have to look at those things today, and how do we create multifamily housing that's allowed by right, not by a special permit. And without any restrictions for the housing for families. It can't be senior only. And while the statute doesn't say it anywhere in it, I cannot imagine the town of Carver, or any other town for that matter, wanting to create multifamily housing without an affordable component to it. Because there's nothing in the bylaw that speaks to the fact that it shouldn't be affordable. And that's why in all of our discussions, in our action plan, we talk about by creating that through zoning, such as 40R.
Right.
And 40R has a potential, I've discussed this before, 40B is the stick of affordable housing. If you don't create affordable housing, we will beat you with 40B. 40R is the carrot. 40R says, we are going to decide where we think affordable housing should be and higher density housing should be. And with that carrot they provided to us, they provide incentive payments to towns. So there is an opportunity to underwrite some of those costs through the zoning. When I was in Kingston and we did a 40R in the very early days, we received a $600,000 subsidy from the state just for creating the zoning. That zoning was for 720 units of housing on a 100-acre sandpit by a commuter rail station. It was a great spot for something like that. In addition, the Commonwealth at the time provided an incentive payment for each unit that was built, not just an affordable unit, for a market unit, for $2,500 per unit. So the combination of things like that makes 40R attractive for communities because it's the carrot. You decide where you want to do it. the state incentivizes you to do that. And it's one of those things we should be looking at as we look at our MBTA bylaw compliance.
Yeah,
And so we'll have those discussions.
They also subsidize under Chapter 40S, from what I understand, for eligible students who enroll within a 40R district. So at least for our smaller communities, we typically always start with 40R as the option because you can require under Section 3A up to 20% affordable, which is not the case if you just did it through an inclusionary component in your base zoning or another bylaw. You can only require up to 10%. So there is kind of, again, a bonus in terms of that for 40R. Like you said, all of the incentive payments that come along with it. The only thing that we do have to do is go through an approval process and eligibility with the state to explore what area in town of 40R would be considered, again, eligible, because it looks at, I think there's 3 different criteria. It can be, an area of substantial development, transit-oriented, or downtown district. So we would have to kind of find an area in town that would fit within one of those 3, whether it's a downtown, et cetera, and go from there. But it is a really good kind of first option, I think, for you folks to explore as what you could do for both producing more affordable housing via your HPP and just, getting a Section 3A compliant district. But we've got a nice runway, I think, planned out for how we're going to explore this. But I would encourage you folks to maybe explore some other local 40Rs. Plymouth has one by their commuter rail station. Lakeville has one by the former commuter rail station. Middleborough adopted one in their downtown and by their commuter rail station. I think North Attleboro is exploring a 40R. I'm trying to think of other local ones. Those are the
So
ones
there are
off the top
tools
of my
out
head. Yeah,
We've got a few options.
with lots of local precedent. So, yeah.
Excellent. Further questions?
Great. Well, we will continue plugging along on the housing production plan. I think, Tom, again, you and I can coordinate with Chris and Maria on engagement next steps, and I'm sure we'll be back to see you folks in a couple months with things.
Great. Thank
So,
you very much for your
All right.
time tonight.
Thank you, folks. It was very nice to meet y'all.
Thanks,
Enjoy
Taylor.
the rest of your
Thanks,
night.
All right. Our next order of business this evening is Power Plus, 31 Rear Main Street, decommissioning bond discussion prior to issuance of electrical permit per special permit conditions, and lighting plan for approval prior to issuance of electrical permit per special permit condition 20. Good evening.
Good evening. Chris Caranta here, representing Plus Power.
Has Andy had an opportunity to look over these numbers? Mr.
Yes,
Brown?
I was going to give you an update on that, if I'll take just a moment if I can, before Chris talks about the particulars.
Sure.
So we have received, as you saw in your packet, a decommissioning bond. This is a requirement for the special permit. Mind you that the provisions of what a decommissioning bond is wasn't anywhere in the bylaw at the time. Because there was just that one confusing line in our zoning bylaw. So we have leaned into the process that we have under solar for a decommissioning bond for that financial security. And what has been presented by the folks at Plus Power, from what I can tell, comports with the zoning we passed in 2023 for battery energy storage, for a decommissioning plan and a decommissioning bond. Not that we can impose future zoning on a use that's already in place. But this is pretty much an industry standard, the things that we're looking at. We're not reinventing anything here. So we forwarded the decommissioning bond to Fuss & O'Neill, who is our consulting engineer, to have them look at the dollar amount and the assumptions that are made in that. So Andy is in the midst of working on that. I have also submitted a request to the town administrator to forward this to town council for their review, because in addition to the amount and the process for the bond, it's the type of the bond and how do we ensure that that stays in place. So we'll be looking at both the numbers, the mechanics of it, as well as the legality, and make sure we've got something in place that is that's going to be there for the life of the project. Because the decommissioning bond goes until, for the life of the project, or when it's either abandoned or out of use. So that's where we're at presently. Those folks are reviewing it, and we'll hear back more as we move through that process. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman, and to Chris, to talk about what we've got in front of us.
Please, Chris.
Yeah, so I'm really here to walk through any questions that any of you may have on the plan. I think the summary on the bond aspect and the costs, that pretty well speaks for itself as the first component of what we're talking about tonight. If you've got any questions, I'm certainly willing to dive into those, answer any questions. I think as Mr. Bott said, it is very standard from an industry perspective, looking at basically restoring the site to previous or pre-existing conditions, removing all of the equipment, all the electrical equipment, foundations, etc.
So that is estimated at this point to be $1,709,540. I have it on the screen in front of you as well as in your packet. So those are the things we've asked Andy to look at. Do those assumptions make sense, and how they go about those things and those costs?
Are we to assume that that's about 125%?
We're not to assume anything. We're checking the math twice.
Andy's going over those numbers.
Correct.
Expected lifetime?
The agreement with ISO New England and with the LGA, I believe, is 20 years. I could check on that to be 100% sure. It is 25. I was looking back.
That sounds,
Yeah.
yeah, that sounds right. All right, so I don't have a lot of questions right now. I look forward to finding out what our Fuss & O'Neill says in regards to the numbers. And does any of the board have any questions? All right, and we also have the decommissioning plan here. And
The second piece, yeah, is the lighting plan. That's the other
the
requirement.
lighting plan. And again, Andy's gonna look at the lighting plan, but for now, currently, what's the proposed height of the lighting?
So with the lighting plan, to clarify, there is no expected full-time lighting to be in place. Everything would be unlit unless there was a need for maintenance, off hours, anything like that.
Fantastic, that,
So there's no
That's
intent for
really
this to be
exciting news.
lit up anytime.
if they're working there,
Yes.
they'll need light.
From a safety perspective, be able to navigate the site, et cetera, that's what this would be. So it
Yeah.
would be someone had to come in, manually turn the lights on, would turn it off. There's no, motion detection, none of that sort of stuff in any of the site.
All right. Heights?
I believe they're detailed in the plan. They are not the highest structures by far on the site, and let's see, there's the
I don't have any
lumens,
numbers here.
orientation, tilt. I believe they're on the order of 15 to 18 feet, but let me, It's arm lengths.
You're talking about the height of the light poles, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's some writing on, some numbers on the back page, which I can read some of it, but I can't read anything that tells me the height.
Yeah, it should be in the calculations for the actual
There'll be
assessment, yeah.
downward facing, dark sky compliant,
They are downward facing, they are dark sky compliant.
and
Oh, I'm sorry, here they go. Yeah, the Z height is, so if you look on page, looks like
15
the
feet.
fourth, L113, it has the luminaire locations, that's part of the calculation they did for the amount of light emitted.
Yep.
So you can see the Z height is going to be in the vertical direction. So they're all within 15 to 15 and a half
Yeah.
feet
Excellent.
from ground level.
And we'll want it contained on-site.
Yes, they're all within the leased property
Excellent.
inside the site, and the light would be inside the site.
So if you give me just a second, I thought I had it loaded here previously, so forgive me as I whiplash people who might be trying to watch what's on the screen here. So this is the lighting plan that was presented, that was also sent to Fuss and O'Neill for their confirmation. So here you see the location of the lighting poles in red on the screen. And then from that, they determine how much light is shed and how far it goes, and that's the nature of the lumens plan. If I'm stealing your thunder here, Chris, feel free to correct me. And that information on this chart here is, you know, where those lumens are at, where they're located at, and how they tail off in the site.
Excellent, all correct.
In order to make sure that at the edge of the boundary, at the edge of the property line, no light spilling off the property. So that is the things that Andy will be looking at in those. And then, of course, as far as the lighting type goes, that's that last sheet that talks about the specifics of the lighting. These are typical Cobra headlights. Hopefully they're not Mercury.
No, they're not.
Yeah, I can't imagine there's a Mercury hybrid light out there. I think most things are probably LED these days because they're just so much more efficient and so much more for the long run.
They're all LED lights, 100,000 hour lifetime.
So Andy is looking at those. He is scheduled to be here on the 23rd to talk about this, as well as the final conditions for
Today,
the,
the 23rd?
pardon me, he's here on our February meeting. Let's go with February 13th. Our next meeting to talk about the lighting plan and give us some comfort, because the applicant can apply for an electrical permit, but they can't get one until these things are completed. They do have a building permit on the site. They're working on the site. They've cleared some things. I don't know if, Chris, you want to give any update as what's going on the site at this point for the
Sure.
board. But they have pulled a permit, but they can't pull their electrical permit until they get these two things done per the conditions of the special permit.
Yeah, great summary. Basically on site, we have completed the tree clearing activity. The site has all been outlined and staked, and has been, all mitigations have been put in place. We've actually had the Conservation Commission out multiple times to review all of that with successful approvals there with no issues, and have done all of the initial sort of topsoil scrape, all the forest mat, as they call it, off the site, and they're now beginning what they call basically the cuts to bring the grade down to the subgrades to be able to put in all the electrical infrastructure, conduits, things like that, and they'll then build back up with that material that they've cut as they build the site back up. So we're into that active, heavy civil engineering work, pretty much weather permitting at this point, day for day. They've been working Monday through Friday, about 7:30, I think, till just before 4 o'clock per the hours that were outlined in the site plan approval and conditions. And that will continue, through the early spring. and we'll get into sort of the building phases with foundations and sort of infrastructure, installation, fencing, things like that, in the late spring, early summer.
Excellent. Further questions from the board? Well, thank you very much, Chris.
I want to throw something up to you guys.
Sure.
To avoid future questions.
If you would have a seat, please, and introduce
Just
yourself.
look at the wall, but I'll introduce myself. John Murdoch from Plus Power. And if you could pull up the lighting fixture display again, I wanted to point something out to avoid future questions for y'all.
I forget stuff I might ask again.
Excuse me?
I said, I forget stuff I might ask again.
Okay. Okay.
Come on over.
Yeah. What I want to point out is these fixtures don't have refractors that hang down below the light. Okay? That's important because if you have the refractors that hang down, when you're off site and they're on, you can see them pretty distinctly. They're all chopped off. Okay, in the light.
Oh, so they're not going to have the glass, the bubble underneath?
Yeah.
It'll be a flat?
It'll be like this one. not
Yep,
like
perfect.
this.
Because that was going to come up, so.
I know it was. That's why I wanted to point out. It's one of these. It's not these. The manufacturer puts the.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that takes a little bit off my mind and certainly makes for a better presentation.
Yeah, and that's what all the calculations are based off of, too.
Okay. Because I was wondering how you're going to keep it on site with
Yeah.
the dome over it.
Yep, no, it's a good point.
Excellent. All right, well, we look forward to hearing from Andy, and I expect that you'll be in touch with him. He'll be at the next meeting, so
Correct.
we'll schedule these guys in at that time, too.
Yeah,
Excellent.
and as far as process-wise goes, this is the easier part of the lighting plan, because it's pretty standard, but it's going to take a bit on the other side of things with the decommissioning and
Yes.
particularly the form of the bond. So we're working on those things and have been since we received it a couple weeks ago. So we've been on that. In fact, actually, I got this from John Holt prior to Christmas, and I looked at it briefly. Then several holidays happened, and then John's like, "Hey, what about that thing? What about that thing?" I'm like, "Oh," so I sort of held him up a bit, just because I didn't quite focus on that. So it's in the queue right now, and we're moving through those sort of things.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. We look forward to seeing you in February.
Sounds good. What's the date again, Mr. Mark?
2/13,
2/13.
day
Okay,
before Valentine's Day.
thank you.
Our next order of business is a public hearing continued on the application of Plymouth Elks Lodge number 1476, requesting a site plan review pursuant to sections 3100 of the Carver zoning bylaw for property located at 169 South Meadow Road in Carver, Mass. Assessors map 113, lot 7-0-E, portion of, in the airport zoning district. Applicant proposes to construct a 2,520 square foot building with all associated parking, driveways, stormwater management, utilities, landscaping, and appurtenances. There is a request for a continuance until February 13th, 2024 from the applicant.
Correct.
Yes,
Andy is
excellent.
still in the midst of working through the particulars. So since he didn't have a report out to them to respond to, we just continue it until.
No worries. So the chair will accept a motion to continue the public hearing on the Plymouth Elks Lodge until February 13th, 2024 at 7 PM, Room 1, Carver Town Hall.
I will make that said motion.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Robinson, seconded by Ms. Sordillo. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Robinson?
Mr. Robinson says aye.
Ellen Sodillo says aye.
Don Williams says aye.
And Mr. Shea says aye. Thank you very much. Mr. Bott, House Bill 3555?
Yes, if I may. So at the back of your packet, and I don't always bring legislation to the board, but we recently had some discussions about the associate member. And so House Bill 355 is a new legislation that's being proposed by Kristen Kasner, who is the former planning director from Burlington, Massachusetts. So she has been a planner for 20 some odd years like I have. and she realizes some of the shortcomings of the zoning bylaw. So this particular one relates to the associate member of the planning board. And in the summary, it talks about currently sole mention of the associate planning board members appointed are because of an absence, a conflict of interest, or when there's a seat vacant in a special permit. And the Attorney General has said that the associate members can only act with respect to that special permit application and no other functions of the planning board, as I keep spoiling the party every time we want to get Don back in his day.
Keeping our hands
Bill in his
tied.
day, more engaged in things. So this House bill would fix this shortcoming by establishing that the associate members can act on any matter before the planning board, which is similar to what it says in the Zoning Board of Appeals. I took it upon myself to write my local legislator and my senator a letter that I shared also with you that basically said I'm writing to express my support for House Bill H3555. As a practicing town planner in the Commonwealth since 1998, I'm well aware of the delays and expense that can be associated with the delays that occur when a full planning board is not in attendance for a meeting. I've worked in Kingston, Falmouth, and now Carver, and understand the importance of this very common sense bill. Even though acceptance of the Mullen Rule helps in a lot of these towns, expanding the role of the associate member is a very basic fix to help local government with their responsibilities. In addition, it'll bring renewed interest in filling too often vacant seats and uncontested races in the planning board throughout the state. And so I brought this to your attention to say it's fine to write your legislator if the board decided at some point that they wanted to send a letter expressing their interest or lack of interest in moving this legislation, they could do something similarly as well. So that is House Bill 355.
And that's how, I certainly feel that it should be an expanded position, that it shouldn't be specifically limited to special permits.
And the zoning boards of appeals have an associate member,
Yeah.
and that associate member gets to do all the stuff.
And that's how it should be,
Yeah.
because, I mean, I know Don sat through a lot of meetings, and now Bill's sitting through them, and it's only specific to special permits, and it should be, if you're here and you're gonna do it all, then you should be participating in all.
But you gotta be like, and I'm gonna go with last year's good example of Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield was a quarterback who was just hanging out, not doing much. And the Los Angeles Rams says, hey, we could use you. He showed up on a Tuesday to play in a game on Saturday, and he won. So even though you're the associate member, you got to be on your game. You got to be here to make sure you know these sort of things. So you're not going to get one of those commercials where you get your own stadium as your house or anything like that. But the analogy is, you know, there's people who are willing to serve their community. It'd be great if they had more things to do while they're serving their community. So that is the nature of House Bill 355. There's also another legislation being filed, it has been filed, regarding site plans, 3551. I'm not going to talk about that tonight because I'm fully engaged in that. But I will be at a meeting this Friday with the Planning Association, and Kristen's going to be there, and she's going to talk a bit more about House Bill 3551, which is related to site plan review. The site plan review is not in Massachusetts general law. It's just a thing that towns have done and created a life of their own. So this will basically put site plan review into the zoning bylaws as it should have been probably years ago. So we'll talk more about that when we get to that point.
The site plan reviews based on the specifics of locality rather than a generality, so.
Yeah, and basically it's prescriptive. And like I said, I don't want to get into the particulars of it because I don't want to misspeak on it. But right now, site plan isn't in the general bylaw. You can't appeal a site plan. If someone gets a site plan, they have to wait till a building permit's issued, and then they can appeal the building permit. So the site plan law would put it into law, would allow people to appeal a site plan and not have to wait for a building permit. But at the same time, if you appeal a site plan and you're not one of the parties involved, you have to post a bond, similar as they do for 40R. So like I said, I'm not going to get too far down that hole, but those are the things that are being talked about in House Bill 3551. So that's what I had. But I did want to touch base on the other thing, that the town meeting articles. We had talked about it a bit last time, and you mentioned it a couple of times, but I still haven't found reference to increasing.
It's, I know in the back of, and I'm sorry, I haven't gotten back to you on that, but I know it is certainly listed in the to-do page at the end of the master plan where it outlines the specific things or the various boards should be doing to move forward with the master plan. But I'll look that up tomorrow. I'll get it to you tomorrow
Okay.
afternoon.
Because I looked in, I'll look again, but.
Yeah, it's also, I think, I want to say it's in the housing, but again, I know it's at the end of it, but I'll go back and look. I know it's referenced at least twice in there.
Yeah,
so.
because in Serpent's document tonight, they talked about the 2017 master plan and what are those goals. And like I said, I didn't see it in there, but if we got it somewhere.
Yeah, I'll go get it.
That'd be swell. That's what I got for you.
All right. Further discussion from the board? Seeing none, we have no minutes tonight. So the chair will accept a motion to adjourn.
I will make said motion.
Motion made by Ms. Sordillo.
I'll second it.
All right, seconded by Mr. Williams. Mr. Robinson.
Ms. Robinson says aye.
Ellen Sedillo says aye.
Don Williams says aye.
And Mr. Shea says aye, and hopefully in the future, you will have the opportunity to say aye also. Thank you all very much. Stay safe and have a good night.